Hello everyone, my name is Vanguard of Valor, and welcome to Ziggurat's Trial by Player. This is a first impression series where we are going to look at a variety of games, and today Ziggurat is our candidate. We're going to be starting this game right away, and we'll come back and look at the character selection and whatnot in a little bit. But, to get started, what is Ziggurat? In short, Ziggurat is a first-person roguelike where we run around with a variety of magical abilities to defeat a variety of enemies across 5 floors of adventure, killing bosses along the way, and hoping to acquire great skills to make things easier for us. In our first floor here, we see that we have a primary attack method being our wand, and this room has a particular element of increased attack rate, which makes it a little bit easier to do damage quickly. You'll notice in the bottom right that we have a purple circle there, which is tracking a decreasing number as we fire, which notes the fact that our weapons take energy to use. Our wands regenerate naturally over time, so they're easy to use for extended periods without running out, whereas our alternate weapons have a limited mana pool, which can be regenerated by picking up crystals after we kill enemies. That is not the only way all cases function, but that is the general rule. On the left, we can see our health bar, which is going to be decreasing as we take damage, and can only be increased if we pick up these red potion drops. We also have additional abilities, such as this spellbook that I'm using now instead. This uses one of our additional mana pool resources, and does things in a slightly different way. Before we get in too quickly into that, you'll also have noticed this game has an experience system. Those yellow crystals we were picking up previously have leveled us up to level 2, and when we hit U to upgrade ourselves, we can choose between a number of perks. Initially, most characters get access to 2, but there is a perk which makes 3 perks available on level up. We're going to take Spell Collector in this case, because the additional weapon we started with uses the spell mana pool, so that'll make it more easy for us to maintain our ability to use our weaponry. As we go into different rooms, we will continue to talk about the way the weapons work, though. So, you may have noticed in the previous room that while I started off by firing single shots like this in a more machine gun style stream, I also have the ability to fire a more shotgun styled blast towards my enemies. This uses up more mana, but has more concentrated firepower, although it is slightly less accurate over longer distances. The way that works is that most weapons have 2 modes of firing. Left-clicking with a weapon and right-clicking with a weapon generally have fairly different effects. For some weapons, the effect is simply fires more projectiles, or something along that vein has a wider spread, but some weapons have very different functionality when fired with their alternate fire. For example, this flame weapon we have currently is a sort of shotgun, and using its R2, fires a very wide blast. One of the big issues with firing those wider blasts is that often the secondary fire has a much longer cooldown time than the primary fire, so you may find yourself unable to fire again if you're using your... that crystal went flying. If you're using your secondary fire too frequently. There are also these golden chalices which can be acquired, which, as far as I can tell, only add to your score and have no direct effect in-game. Now, we're in a trap room at the moment. There are a variety of rooms like this throughout the place, some of which are somewhat dangerous, somewhat are not that bad. This is an effect I've actually never seen, Carrot Rain. When we kill an enemy, a carrot spawns there. This may not have much of an effect since these enemies are all in the air, and carrots are land-based enemies, so we may actually not be affected by this special effect at all. Yeah, it looks like that one did not have any effect, which is unusual. But those are random effects which can appear on any of the rooms into which we venture. Let's quickly run through here so you don't get hit by any of these fireballs. And let's keep moving. There are many rooms to explore on each floor, although many of them are simply arenas such as this one. There are certain special rooms like the trap rooms we've seen, and others which we'll discover later, which we'll go into in more detail once we find them. But the layout of the maps is generally fairly straightforward, and is kind of, in my opinion, is one of the weak points of the game. We'll get into why in a moment, but first of all, we have another upgrade to do after having cleared this room. So, what is this going to give us? These are kind of disappointing abilities. Meditation is an immediate active ability. Instantly regenerating 25% of your health and mana, whereas Magic Missile is something that happens every time we pick up a knowledge gem, every time we pick up experience. Very useful to have, but definitely not one of the more powerful abilities you can get in this game. What I was saying about the rooms, though, is that the room layout is almost entirely squares, such as this one. This room, for example, has a piece of story in it. The scars of war. Even a skilled and powerful wizard starts doubting his abilities after surviving many battles. It is hard to remain calm when you've witnessed too many things you would rather forget. That would explain why the most experienced wizards of the Order refuse to talk about it when a young student seeks out words of wisdom. It's not easy to talk about an experience whose wounds have not healed yet, and maybe they never will. But, as I was saying, while it is interesting that they have these lore rooms and whatnot, and they do have a variety of traps and secret item rooms and all kinds of things like that which can be attained, the actual layouts of the rooms tend to be fairly flat and square. And when comparing to other first-person shooting roguelikes, things like Tower of Guns, which have a heavy emphasis on level design, this one does fall somewhat short as far as being as interesting as was concerned. However, one thing that this game does in a fairly interesting manner is its enemy variety. As you can see, we're fighting mandrakes here, these horrible living carrots. We're fighting mushrooms, which have area of effect poison. They have projectiles, which can be destroyed as you attack them. We fought earlier some wraiths that were flying around the room. We fought skeletons, which throw swords at you. There is a lot of enemy variety in the early game in this game. That, however, is not necessarily entirely a good thing. One of the things that I have a big problem with Ziggurat is that while it does a good job of introducing many different enemy types in the beginning of the game, I feel as though the game somewhat loses track of introducing new enemies later on, as it really doesn't have that much additional enemy variety in some of the later levels. There are additional enemies being added into the game, but as it stands, the enemy variety can be a little bit stale. And we've just reached ourselves a secret room, which gave us the scavenger perk, which gives us an increased enemy drop rate. Every floor has a single secret room, as far as I can tell, and they're all marked by cracked walls, such as the one we've just destroyed. Inside each one, you will find a single random perk card, and a reference to one of their previous games. As it seems, this developer has created many games, although it seems to have not had a great deal of success up until now. While these rooms are interesting, they are fairly easy to find because those cracked walls are pretty distinct and only ever appear on map locations where an intersection could naturally occur but is not already. So for example, you would never find a secret hidden in there because there's no room. And you wouldn't find one in the middle of the room, only ever in these locations where there could have been an intersection. So it does make finding them very easy. It is a rare floor indeed where I managed to make it through the entire floor without finding it. And now we've discovered the boss room. All of these boss rooms have the requirement of a portal key before you can attempt to venture further onwards, and the portal key is generally hidden in one of the other rooms. It may in fact be directly adjacent in this case, which it is. The purpose of this is questionable, really, since it doesn't seem as though fighting the boss and then going elsewhere would be any problem, but you do need to find the portal key before you can fight the boss. Unlike in other games such as Binding of Isaac, where you can attempt to go to the boss directly without going anywhere else first, if you can find your way there quickly. Once we start these boss fights, we'll fight a randomly selected boss from a list. Some areas have predetermined bosses. For example, the 5th floor, being the final floor, always has the same final boss. And I believe the 4th floor generally has the same boss as well, although I'm not entirely certain about that. I have faced them almost every time, but I'm not convinced I have fought them every time. Now, in addition to that, these bosses vary fairly wildly in difficulty. Some of them are incredibly easy, such as this one. Some of them are somewhat more dangerous. And the last boss can be absolutely devastating if you do not have a good selection of skills and weaponry. We're going to increase our maximum health on this level up, and we'll continue to go on as we have explored everywhere on this floor. Touching this portal instantly takes you to the next floor, and that means that if you kill the boss in the center of the room, you can be forced through the portal without picking up everything you may have wanted, so you should be careful around these portals. As we pass through, though, we'll move into the 2nd floor, and we will gain access to a new weapon. Every floor that you reach gives you a new weapon, however, it is not necessarily a weapon that you do not have already. So, as we move into this floor, we'll see if we get lucky and get an alchemical or a staff-based weapon instead of a new spell. And we did. Excellent. Now we have access to a 2nd, or a 3rd in fact, weapon type. We have access to our standard wand with its recharging attacks. We have access to our spell with its fire attacks, in this case a larger spread and high focus damage. And we have access to a wand, in this case a wand which deals poison damage. So we can do damage over time now that we have access to this wand. Or staff, rather. These rooms are fairly nasty, and we'll get into why in just a second. In each of these rooms, these chalice rooms on the map, there are 3 statues where you can offer to the gods. There are 3 things you can do. You can pray to the gods without offering anything, you can pray to the gods by offering health, and you can pray to the gods by offering one of your mana types. It is generally randomly determined as far as I can tell, but it seems to always choose a mana type that you can actually use. So for example, I've never seen it do alchemy when we don't have an alchemy weapon. Now, the thing about these is, they all seem to be entirely random as to what they give you. Offering nothing has no penalty towards offering health or offering mana, and some of them can be beneficial, and some of them can be entirely detrimental. So I don't remember what that actually said, unfortunately. I was trying to think about what I was saying, but that was a Divine Indifference effect. Divine Indifference effects often have effects that only last for a single room, or can be particularly unusual and do things like make one type of mana spend less quickly while all of the others are less efficient, so they burn through much faster. Or it can even randomize your gear. We'll offer health to this Elder God and see what happens. This Divine Gift was a map revealed for the floor, so this is a single area gift, whereas sometimes it can do things like attack rate increase or mana cost decreases, things like that. Let's see what offering spell mana does. Increased protection against enemy attacks. See, that was a great divine gift, giving us increased armor. The thing is, though, sometimes those divine gifts can absolutely destroy you if they happen to do things that make you... Oh, hello. Interestingly enough, that secret room was not revealed with the map, but as you can see, that enormous cracked wall makes it fairly easy to see where it was. What I was going to say, though, was sometimes those divine indifferences, or even divine punishments, can be incredibly painful to your run. This time we get an additional life increase. It's a very nice item to get from our secret room, so we'll continue on our way and see what else we can do. But either way, those are one of the rooms that does appear from time to time, and can be very beneficial to your run if it doesn't happen to absolutely destroy it. I had one run in a previous attempt that was going very well, but unfortunately... Ooh, we're taking a lot of damage now. Unfortunately, Is there anything over here, or are we just getting attacked from those guys in front of us? No, they just have good aim. It was absolutely destroyed by a offering to the gods, randomizing my weapons and making them all do the same type of damage. Instead of having a rapid-fire single-target weapon, a burst weapon, and a poison weapon, I wound up with 3 different kinds of area effect weapons that were not effective, not super effective for my needs. We were taking a lot of damage on these guys. I should probably not stand this close to him since he does have an area of effect attack, but you'll notice that we're running a little bit low on our mana types, so we can't really make use of our various weapons. We have gotten fairly unlucky with acquiring new gear, which may have been related to that specific Divine Indifference effect that we saw earlier. Since I didn't know what it was, it's difficult for me to say specifically what we've done. It may have been that spell costs were more expensive for that floor, or for this combat, or for something similar to that. It's hard to say without knowing. Either way, we've now regenerated our mana from that battle, so we can continue going onwards. Now, another big issue with this game is part of the way the random generation for weapons works. I had a run where I got nothing but spell-type weapons for 4 floors, which meant that for almost the entire game, I had only 2 weapons to choose from and only 2 elements I could use, which meant most of the mana that was dropped by the game was entirely useless to me, and it also meant that the combat was fairly boring, because I only had a little bit of variety to choose between in order to make my attacks more interesting. Now, thankfully, that's not normally the case. A lot of the time, the game does a good job of giving you a variety of weapons by at least somewhere early into the game. But that's not always the case, and that can be problematic and somewhat frustrating for those who just want to try out something a little bit different, or who don't like the weapons they started with. All of the weapons have a different style. For example, magic tends to be higher damage bursts. The wands tend to be longer range, more precise, but less damaging directly, and the alchemical weapons tend to be area of effect weapons. but there are some that are a little bit more spready and a little bit more diverse within each set. We'll grab more maximum health, although we're not currently very high health at all. It's nice to have that max health for later. Each of these perks that we're leveling up can be increased up to 5 times, at which point they stop appearing in the skill pool, and you no longer have to worry about selecting them. But some of them are more valuable than others. For example, one of the earliest available abilities is the one to have your... to gain more skill points from those experience orbs, which is incredibly valuable because of the way it makes it... That's interesting, his head glows even when he's invisible. Because of the way it makes it a lot easier to level up quickly. Runs which start off with a high number of those often wind up much more successful as you quickly gain levels and gain more abilities. However, that's not always the case, but it does seem to happen a lot of the time. Runs that give you access to the knowledge gems, give you more experience abilities, tend to be successful runs, whilst others are not always the case. Now, we are getting ourselves absolutely beat up in here because we're missing another one of the abilities I find incredibly valuable, which is one which makes healing flasks heal you for more health. Since we don't have that, our healing has been much slower this run, and we've been taking a lot more damage. It's not to say that by having that we would be much safer, but this is definitely not one of my better runs, and I did notice that we have not gotten that ability, unlike many times when we do. Come on now, there we go. We have 5 health left. We really need to regenerate some health here, otherwise this is going to be over quickly. So, we may not be able to succeed in this particular run, but that's entirely fine by me, because one of the major elements of this game is that it has a ton, an absolute ton, of items, skills, and abilities which are only made available to you after a run is over. So let's come in here and quickly grab ourselves the portal key, and then we'll keep going on our merry way. You'll also notice that this room has a lot of exposed lava. That is a hazard on the maps that can damage you, unlike in these corridor rooms where you're generally safe from them. In the prison cell here we have slower enemies, and unfortunately this is probably going to be our death, because these enemies have a massive area of effect with their attacks, and have very good aim. And we are dead, like I said. But that is entirely fine by me for this case, because it allows me to go back to the menu and show you some of the other things I wanted to discuss. When the game begins, you start off with a very limited pool of abilities, a very limited pool of weapons, and only a single character, the one we just played with. Now, when you die, you acquire new items. This is a new weapon for the staffs category. The Eagle Staff is marked with tracking runes. It sounds like a homing weapon, which doesn't have a lot of damage, but is easy for killing swarms with. That's interesting. This is something we didn't actually find one of in the previous run. A frozen amulet freezes enemies in place. Amulets are activatable abilities which recharge as you kill enemies, but are fairly rare. We also may have unlocked more things. Nope, not in this particular case, but there is a lot of stuff hidden away in the game. If we take a look here in the armory, for example, we can see that these are some of the things that have been unlocked. And while I've been playing for quite some time, there are a lot of items that are still locked away. So there's plenty to be had here for those who are looking for more variety in the game. You can also go back and look through the various notes. It turns out that the one we just saw was the final note. Not that it makes a huge difference spoilers-wise, there's simply a bit of flavor text to the world. And the bestiary allows you to see a variety of the monsters that you've defeated throughout the various levels, if that kind of thing interests you. But what I find interesting is the way the characters differ between each other. Now, Argo, the apprentice here, is fairly boring. His balanced stats, no strengths and weaknesses, make him usable, but not interesting to use. Kraz, here, has a very powerful magic wand with a large magic wand pool and fast recharge rate, allowing him to be quite dangerous when not relying on other abilities, but he starts with less mana in those other skills. Menzi, here, recovers health and mana as he enters rooms, but mana gems and potions aren't as effective. Simon the Sorcerer has additional skill with all 3 magic disciplines, as it says here, but has less health. Rigel and Safe are 2 of my favorite characters that I've unlocked so far because they're specialists with a particular kind of magic. Rigel has a faster movement speed and starts with a staff and extra staff ability. It turns out that using non-staff skills gives him a rate of fire penalty, but he is very effective at using staves. which is pretty fun, because it means that when you start the game, you automatically start with a wand, and a staff, and whatever item you find on the first floor. So using these characters, you can start off with 3 options for fire power, and that can make it a lot more interesting. Scythe the Librarian, for example, has another really interesting ability, which is that he starts with a spell, in addition to his wand. He has more skill with the spells, but he learns some experience slower, so he'll level up less quickly. On the other hand, he has a hidden ability, which means that he starts with the ability to choose between 3 perks instead of 2. So while he may not level up as quickly, you get a more varied choice when you do level up. And as a result, I found it was much easier to quickly pick up the experience gems give you more experience perk and quickly make up for his deficits. There are a variety of other characters as well. Asuna the Bard has low health, but has very fast, very minimal energy usage, so that is effective for her. Hadar the Templar is interesting because picking up experience orbs automatically replenishes his mana rather than picking up mana gems, so he has a fairly effective way to regenerate those skills. Jules the Harlequin is very agile. Sid the Seer has much faster learning rate, but is very weak to begin with, and is a much more dangerous character. And there are 2 others which I have yet to unlock. You can play the game in 3 difficulty modes, easy, normal, and hard, although hard is only available once you have completed the game in normal mode with the character, as I understand it. It may simply unlock after you beat normal mode with 1 character, but I am, as of yet, not certain. However, each of these characters has a little bit of extra flavor. In addition to their special abilities, if we launch here with Hadar the Templar, we will see that they don't all function in precisely the same manner. Hadar, for example, has a very interesting wand. You can see he has an armored gauntlet, he has a spiked wand. Each character has their own wand and hand designs, but his wand fires in a cross formation, and using his R2 ability, right-click ability rather, fires a hexagon-shaped pattern, which is really interesting, which gives him a little bit of a different flavor to some of the other characters. We also have the Eye of Twilight, a new staff that we haven't seen here, which is one of my personal favorites, as it has an incredibly fast-firing, rapid-fire ability, which is great for taking down single targets. Now, let's venture a little bit back into the Ziggurat here, onto the first floor again, so we can experiment a little bit with these different abilities, and we'll see how they function. You'll notice that while he does have the ability to fire 4 projectiles in a single attack, his shots are much slower firing than other characters, which makes him a little bit more vulnerable initially. Plus, he can burn through his mana very quickly if he's not picking up these experience gems, as that has a big impact on how he actually regains his mana. So while we do need to clear through these enemies quickly, we have to be somewhat careful about it in the process. And as you can see, we've regenerated all 3 of our mana disciplines by picking up those gems, which means that while Hadar has a really interesting wand type, you may want to rely quickly on acquiring... Oop, didn't notice this was a trap room. You may want to rely quickly on acquiring a variety of spells and alternating between them to suit your needs. This kind of thing, I think, is a part of what makes the game a lot of fun to play. Were it not for the variety of characters and weapons, I feel as though this game would get old kind of quickly, especially because the level design, while it looks nice aesthetically, the actual area design is fairly bland and gets old fairly quickly, I find. If it weren't for the fact that the enemies, the characters, and the weapons are very fun to use, I feel as though it would have some problems. Personally, I have yet to really experience much of hard mode, although I have completed normal with several characters, and the difficulty it gives you depends very heavily, I find, on the weapons and perks that you find. A run can go from being an absolute disaster to a great success based on whether or not you find perks that go well with the weapons that you're using, and whether or not you are able to get a variety of weapons in the first couple floors. Without a variety of weapons, you run out of mana very quickly during boss battles, especially in the late game, and it can be very difficult to keep yourself alive. We're going to grab some haste here, so we're a little bit faster moving, keep us out of harm's way a little bit better. Another interesting thing, which I believe I forgot to mention, is that you actually have access to an infinite sprint in this game. So while you may be not the fastest moving on your feet regularly, if you're trying to travel through the maze, you have a very rapid method of transit available to you at all times, which is, in my opinion, definitely appreciated. Not having to slog your way back through previously explored areas just to see if you can find where that hidden secret room is certainly a nice thing. Now, There are also elite enemies, which you may have noticed. That was a green, one of these charging bird creatures. And those guys have particular attributes. There are red, blue, and green elite enemies, which generally have faster movement speed for green enemies, as I understand it, more health or more damage for the various colors. So they can mix things up a little bit as well, as you may have noticed as well. Let's quickly level up here. We can get haste again. Why not? I don't really want talented alchemists since we don't have alchemical abilities. But you may have noticed as well that there are those random effects on the rooms, which can mean that what otherwise might have been a very straightforward room has varied effects and can change things up very drastically, especially if those effects are something like staves do 50% extra or 100% extra damage, but other weapon types do 50% damage. That would mean that if you don't have that weapon type, you can be in a lot of trouble in those rooms, as you won't be able to effectively fight in them. However, if you do have the weapon type required, then you'll be absolutely laughing, as you can tear through the room with ease. Let's tempt our luck with the gods again. So we got some extra armor from our first divine gift. That's nice. We're not going to offer any health at the moment because our health is low as it is, but we'll happily... Okay, here's an example proving what I was wrong. Alchemy mana, and we do not have an alchemy spell. I will happily do that in that case. In this case, our divine indifference is a damage increase, but so is the mana cost. Often, those divine indifference effects have a penalty to go with them, and in this case, I'm totally okay with the results that we achieved. Let's keep looking around and see if we can't make a little bit more progress here. There is our portal key, excellent. And let's keep moving. I may need to go back and look for the secret room, since I didn't find it as of yet on this floor, I don't think. Nope, but we'll see if we can find it as we move forwards here. It may still be in the future. So there is a blue enemy. As I mentioned, there are various colors, and this is another example. They are a little bit tougher, a little bit more dangerous as we fight them. And there are different weapons that can work well against different types of enemies as well. For example, these flying heads have a tendency to clump up together in the air before they charge you, which can make area of effect damage particularly effective against them. Come on now. There we go. So, it is definitely good to learn your enemy types, as it can give you a good insight into what's actually going on. And this is why I like this weapon so much. That spray ability is absolutely a joy to use. However, it's also incredibly wasteful for mana, especially when we have this increased mana cost for all abilities effect happening as a result of our divine gift, which does make it pretty incredibly inefficient. There are some other special room types as well, including one where obelisks spawn around the room, which infinitely respawn enemies until you destroy them. Things like challenge rooms, where making your way through a dangerous obstacle course can give you access to a reward of some sort, be it free perk points, free amulets, and things of that ilk. And generally, they can be pretty beneficial to you if you're able to find them. But there are some problems with this game, and I want to mention them briefly here before I continue to praise the interesting things about it. One of the problems is that the challenge rooms are very few in number, and once you've made it through one or two of them, you will rarely have trouble with that particular kind of challenge room again, and they will become simply free item rooms. Same with the secrets. While they are fairly valuable to find, they're incredibly easy to find as well, with very little preventing you from simply searching around till you find the cracked wall on each floor and getting the free skill point that comes with them. It's not a huge advantage, being a random skill point which you cannot select, but it does mean that you have access to more strength than you might otherwise have had you not. Run back through here and pick up this experience again quickly so we can continue to do battle with these guys. As I mentioned earlier, I find that the level design is somewhat uninspired and often means that you are simply running through largely square areas. This one has a bit of verticality to it, which is nice, but when compared to other games like Tower of Guns, which have a very interesting area design, albeit somewhat less developed enemies, the areas are not particularly interesting to explore, although they do have unusual interactive elements. If I can find where this last enemy is, there he is, I will show you what I mean. So for example, these chandeliers can be knocked around, enemies can push into them and lift them out of the way. This giant stone orb can be knocked loose and will fall onto the area. It doesn't have much of an effect, but you can do it. And those little details are interesting. We also should note that, come on now, oftentimes you can get stuck with level ups which don't really offer you anything you want. They can offer you things which don't benefit you in any way. Here we got Scholar, which is one of the best abilities in the game, in my opinion, because it lets you level up more quickly. So that is a grand old thing to find on the first floor. And here we are at our boss room. Having cleared through everything else, we may as well simply do battle. So, let's fight the boss, we'll see what happens, and then we will probably come to a conclusion on Ziggurat. Now, this is going to be somewhat challenging, as our primary spell type is effectively out of mana. Sir Arthur has a large stream of area of effect attacks, spawns minions, and our wand is not particularly powerful because of its slow rate of fire. Thankfully, all of these bosses do drop elemental crystals as you fight them, so if you are running low on a primary mana source, you can generally acquire more during the fight. So while this is dangerous, as long as we keep moving, we should be absolutely fine. There we go. And we level up yet again. So if we were to spend another level up at this point, we would probably take haste again, because Talented Alchemist does not benefit us. Let's see what our item is on the next floor, and then perhaps we will continue a little bit further to see if we can find an amulet, but if not, we will wind this episode down. These scores also seem to be nothing more than bragging rights on a leaderboard. It doesn't appear to have any effect in-game on what you're actually accomplishing, so if you're just playing for fun, the score is an additional element which you don't need to pay attention to, but if you're looking to try and do score runs, then that is something you can look into. And this is exactly what I was talking about. On the second floor here, our weapon is the Serpent Staff again. So we really don't have a whole lot more variety entering the second floor than we had previously. It's not going to be the end of the world, because I quite like the crystal that we have, but now this is another room that I was just mentioning as well. In this room, spells are 50% cheaper to use, but anything that isn't a spell uses twice as much mana to be cast, which can be incredibly dangerous if you do not have the correct element, or you are already low on a particular mana type. For this character, it isn't the end of the world, as we can regenerate mana from picking up these experience orbs, rather than having to pick up specifically colored gems, but it could be really nasty if we're in a situation where we are now, where we have less mana. One other thing I will say is that when you start this game, it's a lot less interesting. Having very few weapon types available, having very few abilities available, means that early runs can be very samey until you unlock more abilities. Thankfully, you do unlock abilities rather quickly as you die. I'm not exactly sure what criteria are based around the unlocks, or if it's simply a unlock based around the number of deaths that you have had, but I do know that you unlock them at a reasonable rate once you get started, and character unlocks are pretty reasonable as well, based around numbers of enemy kills, which are fairly reasonable to acquire, dealing damage with specific magic types, and that sort of thing. So if you're looking to get into the varied state of the game, there is a little bit of investment required to get past the initial game, where your options are fairly limited, but once you get there, you'll be able to do whatever you like. Do another upgrade here. These is an interesting one, for example, reducing the amount of damage you take, but reducing the damage you inflict. This is a great one for us, although it is very slow to begin with. Our staff mana pool regenerates gradually over time. I think we'll commit suicide here, just to see what other abilities we can get. So we'll stand around in these enemies and let them kill us to end off our episode here. But all in all, I would say that Ziggurat is a really interesting first-person roguelike experience, as we burn to death in a horrible pool of acid. It's a very interesting roguelike experience. It certainly offers its challenges. It has a good amount of variety in the characters, weapons, and abilities which you can gain, and is certainly worth looking at. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. It has its problems with boring level design. It has some issues with having its secrets be far too obvious. I feel that it lacks a little bit in enemy variety in the later levels. Although there are different enemy types that appear, there are very few additional enemy types that I find show up on a regular basis. Most of the enemies you fight are the enemies you've been fighting all along, and I feel as though that is an area which this game could certainly improve. And we've unlocked Corvus, the vampire. That sounds like an interesting character. We've also unlocked the lightweight ability, which means that our speed increases, but our maximum health is lowered. Ooh, that's a scary trade-off. And safe path means that danger rooms or hazard rooms will not appear as often. Interesting. Either way, that is a quick look at Ziggurat. Its trial by player has passed. I would suggest you definitely take a look at this game, although you may want to buy it when it does go on sale. It's not particularly expensive, it is available on Steam, and it will be linked in the description below. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully you've enjoyed this experimental episode of Trial by Player, which I will be experimenting more with in the future with various games, try to solidify my style and get a little bit of a more coherent organization to our arguments, as I am trying to do it a little bit more freehand rather than scripting like my previous Why Play series was. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the future. Until then, thanks for watching, and bye-bye. A little bit easier to do damage quickly. You'll notice in the bottom right that we have a purple circle there, which is tracking a decreasing number as we fire, which notes the fact that our weapons take energy to use. Our wands regenerate naturally over time, so they're easy to use for extended periods without running out, whereas our alternate weapons have a limited mana pool, which can be regenerated by picking up crystals after we kill enemies. That is not the only way all cases function, but that is the general rule. On the left we can see our health bar, which is going to be decreasing as we take damage, and can only be increased if we pick up these red potion drops. We also have additional abilities, such as this spell book that I'm using now instead. This uses one of our additional mana pool resources, and does things in a slightly different way. Before we get in too quickly into that, you'll also have noticed this game has an experience system. Those yellow crystals we were picking us up previously have leveled us up to level 2, and when we hit U to upgrade ourselves, we can choose between a number of perks. Initially, most characters get access to 2, but there is a perk which makes 3 perks available on level up. We're going to take Spell Collector in this case, because the additional weapon we started with uses the spell mana pool, so that'll make it more easy for us to maintain our ability to use our weaponry. As we go into different rooms, we will continue to talk about the way the weapons work, though. So, you may have noticed in the previous room that while I started off by firing single shots like this in a more machine gun style stream, I also have the ability to fire a more shotgun styled blast towards my enemies. This uses up more mana, but has more concentrated firepower, although it is slightly less accurate over longer distances. The way that works is that most weapons have 2 modes of firing. Left-clicking with a weapon and right-clicking with a weapon generally have fairly different effects. For some weapons, the effect is rain. When we kill an enemy, a carrot spawns there. This may not have much of an effect since these enemies are all in the air, and carrots are land-based enemies, so it may actually not be affected by this special effect at all. Yeah, it looks like that one did not have any effect, which is unusual. But those are random effects which can appear on any of the rooms into which we venture. Let's quickly run through here so you don't get hit by any of these fireballs. And let's keep moving. There are many rooms to explore on each floor, although many of them are simply arenas such as this one. There are certain special rooms like the trap rooms we've seen, and others which we'll discover later, which we'll go into more detail once we find them. But the layout of the maps is generally fairly straightforward, and is kind of, in my opinion, is one of the weak points of the game. We'll get into why in a moment, but first of all, we have another upgrade to do after having cleared this room. Hello everyone, my name is Vanguard of Valor, and welcome to Ziggurat's Trial by Player. This is a first impression series where we are going to look at a variety of games, and today Ziggurat is our candidate. We're going to be starting this game right away, and we'll come back and look at the character selection and whatnot in a little bit. But, to get started, what is Ziggurat? In short, Ziggurat is a first-person roguelike where we run around with a variety of magical abilities to defeat a variety of enemies across 5 floors of adventure, killing bosses along the way, and hoping to acquire great skills to make things easier for us. In our first floor here, we see that we have a primary attack method being our wand, and this room has a particular element of increased attack rate, which makes it simply fires more projectiles or something along that vein, has a wider spread, but some weapons have very different functionality when fired with their alternate fire. For example, this flame weapon we have currently is a sort of shotgun, and using its R2, fires a very wide blast. One of the big issues with firing those wider blasts is that often the secondary fire has a much longer cooldown time than the primary fire, so you may find yourself unable to fire again if you're using your... that crystal went flying. If you're using your secondary fire too frequently. There are also these golden chalices which can be acquired, which, as far as I can tell, only add to your score and have no direct effect in-game. Now, we're in a trap room at the moment. There are a variety of rooms like this throughout the place, some of which are somewhat dangerous, somewhat are not that bad. This is an effect I've actually never seen. Carrot